Hello, my fellow creatures. That's going to be my new opening, I guess. I'm kind of parodying Russell Brand's Hello, my 5 million awakening wonders. And Jimmy Dore recently parodied him. And hello, my 1 million lovelies. So I am going to skip the British accent. I have 160 subscribers. Hello, my 160 lovelies, creatures, fellow creatures. Um, I'm hoping there will be more. Please subscribe if you haven't, and please like this video. Just drop a like, please. I'm getting lost in a sea of algorithms. So anyway, I'm going to be reviewing a Blu-ray that is going to be hitting the streets on Tuesday, April 26th. I got it in the mail yesterday, Saturday, April 23rd. So I got a little advanced copy. I might as well plug the company then, the Shout Factory. They've done a lot of great movies on DVD and Blu-ray, and they tend to lean towards genre movies and kind of oddities and things that fell under the radar, kind of like Rhino used to do. They may even have bought Rhino. I'm not sure. I thought I saw a Rhino logo on a couple of their DVDs. But in any case, this is one that is near and dear to my heart, and this is one that is going to tie into a blockbuster film coming out on, I believe, May 5th, which is Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. So, what you ask is this item. So let me show you to you. This is Doctor Strange. You know, it says DR period, not Doctor spelled out DOCTOR. Peter Hooton and Jessica Walter, man. Now, at first glance, the silhouette and the symbol in the top window of Doctor Strange's Sanctum Sanctorum, this really evokes the comic book Doctor Strange. As we dip into this, though, there are quite a lot of divergencies from that. I want to talk about the history of this movie, the movie itself, and what I think about it. And I'll go ahead and talk about the Blu-ray now. There really isn't much to talk about, unfortunately. My good buddy Tim Tolbert asked me about the transfer. He wanted me to fill him in. And to be honest, there's nothing to say. The transfer it's excellent. It is far better than the bootleg that I purchased through ioffer.com about 8 years ago, which I have watched a few times. Everything is clear. There's a lot of darkness, but that's how it was shot, really. It really evokes the 70s. It's a really clear look at like some really cheap, darkly lit sets in the 70s and a few location shots in New York City because, you know, that's where all Marvel's characters live. And, of course, Doctor Strange famously lives at Bleecker Street in Greenwich Village. And I had the pleasure of walking by his Sanctum Sanctorum with my ex-girlfriend, Rachel. It was off of Cherry Lane, and I couldn't see it because it's magically obscured. So it's like I looked right through it, but I got to say I was there, so that was pretty cool. So anyway, this came out in 1978. Marvel was like, they decided to do this live action thing. Stan Lee was, well, he was being Stan Lee. You know, he was hyping and huckstering and going to live in Hollywood, where he was, you know, going to bring the gospel of Marvel to the Marvel hungry masses. So he would constantly write in his that Stan Lee soapbox thing he had, which came out every month in the books. And I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt that he wrote those. They weren't super long. Some of them were quite eloquent. I remember he did one on racism that was just incredible. He was anti-racism, needless to say. He was Jewish. But anyway, he was hyping these projects that were going to be done by various studios who had bought the rights to adapt Marvel characters onto the big screen. A lot of times he, and most times fans then, and some even now, refer to them as his characters. I've spoken about that. I linked on this channel, so I won't go into all that, but I will talk a little bit about the creation of Doctor Strange, just because, I don't know. I want you guys to be informed If there's something I don't know, I'll tell you. I don't know. I can't remember. Uh, so anyway, the saga goes is that, and I was alive then. I was a very, very young tot, but I already liked Doctor Strange and the Incredible Hulk. Those two were licensed to Universal Studios. The Incredible Hulk came out and it was a big hit, 2-hour pilot, and then it got its own series. Shortly after that, the Amazing Spider-Man pilot came out with Nicholas Hammond as Peter Parker / Spider-Man. I don't remember if that was also a Universal production or not. I apologize. There's already something I forgot. And then there's Doctor Strange. And then came Doctor Strange. This one was arguably the one I was the most excited about. Hulk was one of my top characters back then. One of my very favorites. But I liked the show. I loved Bill Bixby, but you know, it was a massive departure from the comic books. It had a few cosmetic things in common with the Hulk and a couple of, well, no plot elements, but a couple of thematic elements. But Stan was super excited about it. He hyped it. He began writing a daily comic strip that was syndicated across the world. I read it every week. I clipped it out. There was a Sunday color one. And his brother Larry Lieber did the pencils. I'm not sure if he inked it as well. The inking looked like it was kind of some of those kind of generic Marvel bullpen guys like Frank Giassua and Mike Esposito that have kind of a blander, curt kind of style that kind of washes the nuance out of the lines. But you know, they were workmanlike. This was an assembly line business, so now it really had to churn it out because they had to churn out a strip a day, and they weren't very good. Now Larry Lieber drew the Hulk exactly like the comic book Hulk, not like the television Hulk, and he drew Bruce Banner. Well, he drew Bruce Banner like the comic book Bruce Banner, not like Bill Bixby. However, the origin of the Hulk was the same as the TV show, and his name was David Banner instead of Bruce Banner. And the adventures became increasingly fantastic and action oriented, much different than the TV series. It had like 2 Hulk out scenes per episode, where he'd throw guys into like a big stack of boxes and they fall over. And that was the action. And as far as fantasy, they didn't really start going into that until well into the series, where they threw in a few of those fantasy and sci-fi elements, albeit not adapted from the comics either. The one was inspired. There was a character obviously inspired by the Abomination. That was a gamma irradiated guy like Banner, and he turned into kind of a bear-like creature, I think, and battled the Hulk. Oh, at the time I was just so excited, but I had a love-hate relationship with that show. The reasons I've already made clear. So Doctor Strange is also a character I really loved. I would occasionally get his comics when my mom and I would go looking at the newsstand each week. And she was, bemoaning having to part with some money when we were extremely poor. But I did collect the Defenders faithfully. And of course, the Defenders was led by Doctor Strange and included the Incredible Hulk among its founders and key members. So I grew up reading the Doctor Strange written by Steve Englehart, Steve Gerber primarily. Englehart also wrote Doctor Strange at the time in Marvel Premiere and in his own comic book. I want to go ahead and plug this real quick while I'm here with this. I have begun a Defenders series. I'm going to announce it. All about the Defenders, Marvel's Defenders, like the whole history. I'm going to go through every issue of the old series, every appearance, sum it up, give you my analysis, my take on it, trivia, facts, try to contextualize it. It's going to be called Deciphering the Defenders. And I've shot the first 5 episodes already. So I've been talking a lot about Steve Englehart and Steve Gerber's Doctor Strange lately on camera. You guys just haven't seen it, which, might be a good thing for you guys. So Doctor Strange, let me see, is there anything inside of this? There's the universe. There's the universe, my friends. So it is vast. The first shot in this movie says there is a barrier that separates the known from the unknown. Beyond this threshold lies a battleground. where forces of good and evil are in eternal conflict. The fate of mankind hangs in the balance and awaits the outcome. It's got some really loud noise kind of music. The soundtrack to this is wonderful. I'm going to talk about that in a little bit. Almost all electronic. In every age and time, some of us are called upon to join the battle, ... And then you see the big window symbol of Doctor Strange, which of course has become his iconic symbol, which was designed by Doctor Strange's sole creator, Steve Ditko. And yeah, this has a nice little cast here. I'm kind of watching the beginning again as I'm talking. Sorry to look away from you, beautiful people. But anyway, it's Peter Hooton as Dr. Stephen Strange. Jessica Walter plays Morgan Le Fay. So here we have an odd melange of myths here and source material. Sir John Mills plays the character named Thomas Linmer. For some reason, they show this jackal-like, Anubis-like statue, and then they show some other various symbols and occult sigils, and then they go into the universe. And the helpful closed captions tell us that this is ominous music. There are some hilarious closed captions on this. I'll try to point them out as I go, as I see them, because they're ridiculous. They're almost as funny as the Twin Peaks one. Worrying intensifies, whooshing sound, that kind of stuff. I mean, do deaf people? I mean, what do they think this is? I don't know. If I were deaf, I'm like, what's a whooshing sound? But anyway, before I get into this plot here, I'm talking a little bit more background. So Stan Lee, like I said, he was living up in Beverly Hills. He was living the high life with his wife, Joan Lee, and daughter, Joan Jr. And for a time, his next door neighbor was the great indie filmmaker, Larry Cohen. I'm not sure if I've ever reviewed a Larry Cohen film on this channel or not. I should have if I had. I'm a huge fan of several. Oh, I have. Hell Up in Harlem, one of my early episodes, I discussed Hell Up in Harlem. So they became buddies, and for a short time, as the anecdotes go, Mr. Cohen was going to write the screenplay to this Doctor Strange television film for Stan. And Stan was a more on-set consultant of this by his own account on this than any of the other series, because after this there came two very tragic 2-hour pilot movies for the Captain America with Red Brown. And when I say tragic, I mean that they were tragic in that they were tragically horrible. And at the time I watched them, I really was sickened for many reasons. Now, I'm friends with Red Brown on Facebook. I hope he doesn't see this and come beat me up. He's still fit for like 70. And he's very proud of Captain America. And of course, he's ridden the wave of the Captain America revival with the Chris Evans MCU series. But I don't blame him. I mean, he was Captain America. He was legit the first live action Captain America. So I gave the guy props. He also did a good job in some hilarious Bruno Mattei Italian genre exploitation films, which my good friend Sean Lee Levin has recently been watching. I saw a little while back. My old buddy, the Marksman, showed them to me a few years ago. I'm a big Bruno Mattei guy. So, yes, the Captain America was disastrous. So Stan, according to himself, he had some input on the Hulk, but obviously not really, because it's so vastly different. I think he was more like a cheerleader. Like, yeah, you go. I'm going to show the world the Hulk live action. I don't care what it's like. It's just going to be the Hulk. My character. So with Doctor Strange, though, we get to the third pilot. And Lee apparently went on the set. He had more input. And I think a lot of it might have to do with the fact, I'm just speculating here, might have to do with the fact that Stan and Larry Cohen had already been hashing out adaptation ideas for a little while, which I think is such a cool idea, thinking of these two guys sitting around talking, of course, in Beverly Hills, affluent Beverly Hills, and they're talking about adapting Doctor Strange, and I wish someone had filmed that. So it came to be, and it was so. And yes, I watched it as a kid and I loved it. It did differ, and I did that kind of mental gymnastics thing I used to do when I watched live action adaptations of comic books before they started becoming faithful to the source material. I would basically study the minutia of the film. Like, you know, I didn't have frame by frame on TV back then, though later I did a frame by frame on some stuff. But basically, I would take in all these details. My mind kind of works that way anyway, generally. And the stuff that wasn't like the comic, I would just kind of, you know, gloss over in my mind. And the stuff that was, you know, very similar to things in the comic book, I would say, oh, that was in the comics. That's this, and they translated it this way. And I'm going to do that in a few minutes. So, warning. But I've always done that with all adaptations. I've usually done it in my head. Now, when I was married, unfortunately for my ex-wife, she she had to put up with me doing it whenever we watched an adaptation. Like, for instance, when we saw the Battlestar Galactica, the series, it was, according to her, quote unquote, the greatest science fiction television series ever made, a possible second being The Twilight Zone. I'm just going to leave that out there. I'm not naming her so y'all can harass her. I'm just saying. But I was constantly like, that's kind of how it was in the original series. Oh, that's really different. Oh, they kind of took this and that. And then I did it when we watched Daredevil too. She was with me just long enough to watch the first season of Daredevil, and she was like, out, gone into the night. So, I'm going to kind of touch on that here. There's some really good artwork of some of the characters that are used as kind of props or various shots. I don't know who the artist was. Really cool pen and ink, very realistic drawings of Peter Hooton as Dr. Stephen Strange and of Jessica Walter as Morgan Le Fay. So, like I said, I loved this when it came out, and I did make a lot of excuses for it not being faithful to the comic books. However, I'm going to do the same thing now as I did then, in a way. I mean, because I think there's more of a science and a mystery, an alchemy, perhaps, to adaptations that I'm fascinated with. I talk often with my friend Tim McLean, and a great supporter of this channel, a long-time friend, and he has told me phrased better than I am doing now, the subject of translation of stories from medium to medium, cross media, has always fascinated him. The whole translation / adaptation thing, and so in that we are definitely brothers, as in many things. So, I'm just going to tell you kind of what this is about, the movie. As I go, I'll tell you how it diverges from the comic book. I'm not going to tell the origin of Doctor Strange and history of the comic book. All I'm going to say is, yes, Steve Ditko solely created Doctor Strange. Stan Lee did supply the name. There was a character called Doc Strange in the Golden Age, a superhero, which later Alan Moore kind of revived and renamed Tom Strong for his America's Best Comics, published by Wildstorm / DC Comics in the 90s or 2000s. So Doc Strange was out there, and in one issue of one of his mystery titles, or it could have even been one of the early Iron Mans, in one issue, Stan Lee picked that name up as he tended to borrow names of previous existing Golden Age characters, sometimes Marvel, and they'd be the same character or not, like the Angel. Roy did it with the Vision, too, obviously. Sometimes not the same character, like Daredevil or Captain Marvel. So he had a Doctor Strange brief. There was also Dr. Droom that the Jack Kirby and Stan wrote in one of the mystery titles. It was later renamed by Marvel Dr. Druid. So kind of that, this was all kind of happening around 61, 62, 63. So Doctor Strange was trying to think. I read Origins of Marvel Comics when I was a kid. Yeah, first was the Fantastic Four, then the Hulk, then Spider-Man, believe, then Doctor Strange, then Thor, in order of appearances. Fantastic Four was 1961. All the others were 1962. Now, I may be fucking up and getting these transposed. Perhaps Thor was the fourth creation, and Doctor Strange was the fifth. But I had this stuff, emblazoned in my mind. I read that book when I was a kid, Origins of Marvel Comics by Stan Lee. I read it until it was falling apart. It did not make the move. It didn't quite fall apart. Unfortunately, it didn't make the move into my current house. I lost a lot of my library when I moved due to some bad circumstances. But it's one of those ones that I just about could recite the whole book. And of course, many of the things that Stan Lee relates as anecdotes and as facts, his recollection of things have since been debunked as false, some even in court of law during the Jack Kirby lawsuit. And of course, Stan's plea was always, I got the worst memory in the world. I may be recollecting it wrong. And he'd smile, and everybody's like laughing and happy because it's Stan Lee. But, but that's actually a good tactic. I noticed some of this is the Johnny Depp trial this week or doing. I don't recall. Did Mr. Depp do drugs? I don't recall. That's probably the best way to go. These guys learn this from our politicians like Hillary Clinton, and Ronald Reagan. So they learn from the best, man, the best liars there are. And the very best, baby. So Stan, his relation about Doctor Strange was kind of rooted in him liking radio mystery shows, according to this book. And Chandu the Mystic, who was a comic book character, it all came down to him, and he wanted to, style and Steve Ditko, or I forgot, they all had these alliterative adjective names, and sometimes just little nicknames like Jack King Kirby, Jolton Joe Sinnott, and Smiling Stan Lee, and Rascally Roy Thomas. These could go on forever. But Larup and Larry Lever, but he was like Stainless Steve or Styleless Steve. He didn't say style, and I just like saying that. Steve Ditko, was going to do the art, and he'd done a lot of mystery. Okay, so Stan Lee, really didn't load this book with real facts and documented information, and that's okay. He presented it as his memories. Unfortunately, it was like signed into virtual law as, Bible, facts, complete, the capital T, truth, capital T. And it's still like it is still, those accounts are still like holy scripture to a lot of fan bros. And that's unfortunate. Some of that mythology and apocrypha from Stan Lee in that era, coming from him himself, has carried over into the MCU era, where you have a lot of people like, oh, I love these movies. I love Stan Lee. He created all these characters, and he did this. Like, no, he didn't. He did some. I'm not gonna say he didn't do anything. He was the editor in chief, man. He made sure these comics got out every month, and that alone was a Herculean task. He deserves major props for that. But creatively, he wasn't the dynamo that history has assigned him the title of. But again, that's his story. So yeah, the real story is Steve Ditko had this character, and he made him up. He named him Stephen because spelled Stphen. My favorite spelling of Stephen, different from Steve Rogers, Captain America, or Steve Gerber. His name is Stephen Ditko. That was his name. Stephen Ditko, Stephen. To the point where when I was a little kid, I started reading The Defenders. The first time I saw it, I got my mom to read some comics to me, and then I tried to kind of read them myself before I was formally taught how to read. And I was like, there was all these scenes in Defenders between Valkyrie and Doctor Strange. They became really good friends. And he would call her Val, and she would call him Steven. So I would one time I said something to my mom about one of those scenes, and I said, yeah, and thank you, Stefan. She's like, Stefan? Who's Stefan? And I said, Stephen Strange. He's the leader of the Defenders. And she's like, let me see that. And she's like, that's pronounced Steven, even though it's PH. You'll learn all this when you learn how to read in school. But my mom had already taught me tons of big words and what they meant. See, I'd read the Marvel comics, and I wouldn't be able to read most of the stuff, but occasionally I would just see things, and I'd ask my mom what they were, like images. And then occasionally she would tell me the names of things, and names started to become familiar to where I'd then know to go back to the newsstand and pester her the next month for the next Spider-Man. So but I knew who all these characters were. Some of them I got their names wrong. Originally, I thought the Vision's name was the Avenger because they used to put in the corner next to the titles the star of each comic book, a little graphic, usually one drawn by John Romita, the art director, but not always. And the Vision stood there very grimly next to the Avengers. Well, I thought he was the Avenger, and I drew a picture of him and called him the Avenger. So yeah, Stephen Strange, that was named after Stephen Ditko. So other than Doctor Strange name supplied, by corporate, in this case Stanley, and probably Martin Goodman was like, yeah, sounds good to me, whatever. And just make some money, Stan. Hence came Doctor Strange. Now his first few issues in Strange Tales didn't tell his origin, and they were very creepy, dark stories. The art was very weird. It really holds up as very noir-like. And the origin of Doctor Strange, finally published 5 issues later, was to me the best drawn, the best rendered. It kind of transcended Ditko's more cartoony style of that period, because he's churning out comics all the time. He's a master cartoonist, and like Kirby, he's fast and becomes hyper stylized. This one has some very realistic drawings up close of Steven smoking a cigarette in the city at night. His hair's growing out. He's growing it. He stopped shaving, and he's a bum because he's become an alcoholic. So you could tell that the origin of Doctor Strange was very near and dear to Steve Ditko, and that he brought it across as real, as palpable, and it's really, to me, it's the finest origin story in a single issue of that period of Marvel, as far as craftsmanship and just how it holds up, how it looks, how it's interesting. It's not really dated. It's of its era. It's evocative of its era. But anyway, I love it. So I'm going to talk here about this, how this has diverged, and throw in some of those, where this is Ditko-ish and where it's not, and etc. after this lengthy introduction. So just trying to give you some background. I just tend to drone on a bit. So in this film, Peter Hooton plays Dr. Stephen Strange. I've said that 20 times. In the comic books, he was a surgeon. He was a cocky, arrogant surgeon. He was greedy, did it for money. He lived the high life. Then he got a car accident, and the nerves in his hands were damaged, and so he couldn't hold a scalpel. Now, I have suffered due to medication at times from fine hand tremors. I didn't have delirium tremens, and I don't have Parkinson's or anything. My mother did. She passed away of complications of it. So now my hands are steady, but so for a while I had this problem. So I kind of finally knew what Dr. Strange was talking about, and I'm like, I could not hold a blade and cut a straight line. I can barely cut a straight line when I'm cutting cardboard to encase my eBay comic book orders in. I certainly couldn't do it to a guy's brain. So Doctor Strange, of course, he could never operate it again. He was crushed and ruined. He went through his fortune trying to find a medical cure. And finally, he was like this bum who had stowed away on a ship. He'd heard these legends in a bar somewhere. And that's what brought him to Nepal. And he found the ancient one. He thought this guy was a sorcerer, powerful ancient sorcerer who could heal him. But things didn't turn out the way Stephen wanted. And basically, Stephen had to learn lessons, of humility and altruism that he had never really possessed before. This film meets you about halfway. Stephen is a cocky, womanizing, wisecracking, irreverent guy in his ward. He's a psychiatrist, though, but he's got a medical degree. He diagnoses a lot of people's medical symptoms, but he talks about how it ties in with their state of mind. And he has some really strong beliefs that I think are fascinating because it's almost like this came out in the tail end of the 70s, and the New Age thing was starting to wane then. Of course, and the whole fascination of the occult and magic that was hugely popular from the end of the 60s through the early 70s. You had everything from Anton LaVey's Satanic Bible to the film The Exorcist. That kind of bookends the whole era there. But my dad collected some New Age books. His leanings was more toward flying saucers, ancient astronauts. I've talked about this stuff ad nauseum in my video. We need to talk about the Eternals. You really need to watch that. Because I go into all of the stuff about Jack Kirby being fascinated with these books too. And my father collected them. I may still have a few that I managed to salvage from the old house. But my dad was into that side of it. He wasn't into like I was going to say the crystals and rainbows, but that's actually kind of more popularized in the 80s and 90s among New Age stuff. But that whole self-help movement exploded in this period, and they're kind of tied together. Stephen Strange in this movie kind of represents the self-help movement era, the power of positive thinking, self-determination, self-determinism. He's a rationalist. He's the evidence of his senses, a guy, empirical evidence. He's not an asshole about it though. He doesn't lecture people and beat them over the head with it. However, when presented with magic, the idea of magic and real good and real evil, he argues against it thusly, as I just described. And Peter Hooton does a fantastic job with this character. He's got really, really blue eyes. They're really hypnotic. He's got a slight perm, which is popular back then. This was also the year that Luke Spencer became popular in General Hospital. He had the perm. And he does have the big mustache, like the character in the comics had at the exact same time. People nowadays would call like a caterpillar or a porno mustache, but I think it looks cool on him. And now he's got the more fashionable goatee, kind of like I grew out like 30 years ago. And when I grew it out, I had a mustache, single mustache in the 80s. And I worked at a store that was so fascistic about the dress code. I couldn't have sideburns. I couldn't have a beard. My mustache could not go below the top of my lip. So I had a really mustache. And it was very faint and didn't grow very much. It's like, it's taking my whole life to get kind of thick, and now it's turning white, so you can't really see it. But yeah, Stephen Strange had the mustache. He did not have the white streaks in the hair. And they even express his age in this story as 33 when this occurred, which, is a magical number. Well, it's a magical number to me, and it would have relevance to certain people, like my sorceress ex-fiance. I don't know if she'd describe her that way, but that was like her number. Her life path was 3 and 33, and she used to always be able to sense when 33 would pop up. And I have numbers like that too, like 23 and 87. 23 was the big one that William S. Burroughs and Robert Anton Wilson like popularized, among people who follow, odd, weird phenomena like me. But in the world of magic and the occult, this is the real deal. In Crowleyan magic, there's a number for every letter, and certain combinations of numbers meant something. It's all very interesting. I have a lot of this in my story, Flicker Street, because several of my characters are sorcerers. And so I've researched this stuff real heavily. I've only myself cast about 2 spells, real spells, and I've only participated in a few other rituals that other people were conducting. And that's been some time. But I'm sure if I'd married my ex-fiance, there would have been a lot. I mean, because we were planning a lot. Another aspect of our lives, we were planning together. Out the door, gone into the night. So what I'm trying to get at is that the fact he's 33 is fascinating. And the address that he ends up, learning the mystic arts at is on Bleecker Street in Greenwich Village. It does have the sigil on the top of the house. It's given here as the exact address is 22 Bleecker Court. So 2233. I like the thought that went into this. This guy, Philip DeGuere, he wrote it, directed it, produced it. And, he may have gotten some ideas from Larry Cohen's original treatment, which, I don't know how extensive it was. It could have been like a paragraph. And I'm sure a few ideas from Stan Lee and from the comics. But he's very devoted to bringing his ideas across. And his cosmology of Doctor Strange, before I get back into Doctor Strange's personality and origin and how that differs from the comics and later films, this cosmology does contain a mentor, an aging mentor. Now, in this case, he has kind of fused the Ditko Doctor Strange universe with Arthurian legend, and then with demonology, and then with a few little scraps of cult stuff from here and there, even a couple of other Marvel comics. It's a weird melange. Does it work? I think if you've never read the comic books or seen the Cumberbatch films, I think it does work. I think the disconnect on this movie will be it's old, it's slow, it's cheesy, it's campy. So I'm going to be throwing some very unpopular opinions of that in a few minutes. So yeah, the cosmology. The aged mentor is not called the Ancient One. He's not Asian. See, they were politically incorrect before Kevin Feige was, or Kevin Feige thought he was politically correct, but he really was more racist than the way he cast Tilda Swinton. And I covered this in a video too. I think the headline was something like Kevin Feige admits mistake in Doctor Strange casting. And this is true. Look it up on YouTube. There's probably still a video of him doing it. And I'm glad he finally did. And then, of course, he did Shang-Chi and kind of tried to course correct here a bit, not be so Asia-phobic. So he's British, played by Sir John Mills. I believe it's the father of the actress Hayley Mills. And, that was good, some cool casting. They probably were like, who do we get? Ralph Richardson, Sir John Mills, John Houseman, some aged man with a theatrical voice, preferably British. And that's another kind of trope that he threw in here. That was popular in a lot of, horror and sci-fi and supernatural pop culture and films like the Hammer films, of course. So that's one little shard he threw in there. Now, he has a disciple named Wong, simply Wong, and he is Asian. They got that right. He's played by a Japanese actor, Clyde Kusatsu, not a Chinese actor, but that's all good. They got the general racial makeup correct. Wong serves him and calls him master, and they even address this thing and hint at the racism and the kind of now taboo racism implied in those old depictions of wizened Asian sorcerers and similar types like Fu Manchu, and how people serve them, and how an Asian man should be. I mean, in the comics, they're both Asian men. He calls him master. But the idea of master itself as in a slave, they kind of address that in the dialogue here very, very slyly and well. And also the idea of an Asian man, adult man saying master to a white man. And, I mean, that's the colonizers, baby. You don't call a motherfucker master. It's like when Obama bowed to some king and people were like, why the hell did you do that? And I'm like, I have theories, but we won't get into all that. So yes, Wong, he has, instead of being shaven head and clean shaven, he has very short black hair and a mustache. And he also knows sorcery. He hurls a few eldritch bolts of energy here and there. So I gotta say, the basic template of Wong in this film, it was adapted pretty closely for the MCU version of Wong. This version of Wong I consider a compromise. He's in many ways an improvement or modernization of Ditko's character, but he's not excessively overcompensating like the MCU version. I think in the MCU version they were like, we cannot have Wong be anyway a servant to the Ancient One. He may have learned magic from her, but he's a man. He's an Asian man. He's empowered. He's got agency. He's super powerful, and he has his own little quips and side wisecracks like all the other characters. He's equally cheesy, and he has this equally crazy effects coming out of his hands, and he gets to guest star in another Asian heroes movie, and and now he's the Sorcerer Supreme because Doctor Strange is blip. So, they've really built Wong up to be this a vastly more important and powerful and character with a much more forceful personality in the films. And I'll go ahead and let it be known, another very unpopular opinion. I don't really like that. I don't really like the Wong in the MCU. I don't. Benedict Wong is a good actor, but I don't like his look as Wong. I don't like his costume as Wong. I don't like his performance as Wong. And I don't like all the other things I just said. Just invent a new character. That's what I would say. Uh, you know, but what do I know? I mean, I get it. To me, that's poor adaptation. Even though there are a lot of elements about the Doctor Strange 2016 film by Scott Derringer that are much closer to Ditko's comics as far as events than this is. But that still doesn't mean it's necessarily a better adaptation. We'll get into that. So, uh, well, Stephen Strange is like, like I said, he's kind of the world, and he that's similar to the comics. He's not as much of an asshole. He's not a surgeon. He's not as rich. He's like a resident. Um, he seems like middle class. Um, we learned that his parents died in a car accident when he was 18, and he was supposed to go with them on this trip. And for some reason, at the last minute, he decided to do something with his friends or something, maybe something for school. He's a little vague, and they were killed. And his father willed him this ring. Now, the ring has the sigil that sits atop the Sanctum Sanctorum in Greenwich Village. That's a new idea. Popularizing the sigil as more than just a window and making it into like an occult symbol endemic to Doctor Strange. Now, that I believe personally, there was some imagery of that in the comics, but I think this movie is kind of the source for what's common now, which is that symbol like kind of sums up Doctor Strange. And it's very important and is very visually iconic, of course. And I'm glad that Marvel retained such an iconic visual. I'm glad this movie did. This was a wonderful, respectful adaptation in certain ways, I've got to say. And the MCU has been respectful, and kind of now when you see that sigil, like everybody knows that's Doctor Strange. I mean, your average dude and chick knows that's Doctor Strange. And that makes me kind of happy in a way. Doctor Strange has conquered the universe finally. Um, I can't express how much I love this character and have since I was like maybe 3 or 4 years old. Um, so then you get into the idea of, well, if he's this way, similar in this way but different in this way, how does he change when he learns the mystic arts? In the comics, he has a profound philosophical change. Like they used to give these taglines at the beginning of comic books on the first page for a while in the 70s. They'd have a little sum up of their origin or their power or their idea, and then they'd put Stanley presents that character. And I don't remember all of this. It was a very well written thing, but I remember it began once he was a man like other men, seduced and jaded by material things. Uh, then, of course, the next sentence, which I don't remember, is basically saying, now he's kind of more than a man. He's a philosophical, whatever. And I really dug that. In the 70s, like I said, was a time of self-help. It was also a time of like mysticism and faux mysticism and miracle cures and Hare Krishnas on every corner, and like I said, Anton LaVey. And there were a lot of these things, going on, running through all the currents of pop culture and the media. It was not considered evil and bad. I mean, now in the 80s, when Reagan took over and empowered the ridiculous religious right, the evangelical fools, everything became evil. I mean, and then Jim Shooter even canceled or defanged all of the creations in Marvel that were associated with magic or demonology, except Doctor Strange, because I guess he sold a little too well for Shooter to kill him off, but he would have if he didn't, believe me. And I've covered that in a recent video, that scenario in a recent video. Maybe. I don't know if it's one I've shown you guys, done for you guys and published. I may have been talking about it in these Defenders videos. So I'll be getting some of that mixed up, I'm sure, from time to time. I'll try to stick to things I know I've already talked about and just talk about them again and again. Trying to extrapolate on some ideas, though, seriously. And And you can take this as entertainment and not seriously, or otherwise, or both. I prefer both, really. Laugh while you learn. So, uh, yes, what is his big change? And there is a big change, and it's kind of touching, and it's well acted, well scripted. It's not in depth. It's not really totally believable to happen in such a short span of time. You know, they've crunched these events into like a few days, as opposed to the years of Stephen Strange's journey from the cocky neurosurgeon to the enlightened sorcerer supreme. Steve Ditko had that happen over a period of years. I mean, his hair turned white, you know, on the sides, and I think Ditko implies it probably took 10 years, roughly. And Doctor Strange is maybe of an indeterminate age. I would, my speculation has always been if the old Marvels went in real time, which they did up until the late 70s. Well, until John Byrne and Jim Shooter came up with the sliding time scale bullshit. Most of the writers went by real time. So if Doctor Strange debuts in the modern day, 1962, and you say 40, then yeah, he looks like a 40-year-old man for back then. Now, in the very early 1970s, Steve Englehart had a wonderful long arc, a definitive arc, really, illustrated by Frank Bruner. I'm selling some of the issues on eBay. Check it out, the original issues. And in one storyline, Doctor Strange conquered death. He conquered death, and he rode a white horse, a pale horse, and an ankh appeared briefly on his forehead. And so he never aged after that physically. That's when he attained Sorcerer Supreme. So his age didn't matter. So he could have been 50 when he first appeared in Ditko. But I would like to say 40 to 45, a healthy 40 to 45-year-old man. When I say healthy, I mean, you know, he was in good shape. He did a lot of running around and adventures with the Defenders. And, of course, he was highly sexually active with Clea, his love from another dimension. And we'll get into her in a minute, too. But anyway, in this story, he's 33, and it takes place in a few days. So what are you going to do? It's a pilot. You got to jam the info. One criticism of this movie, it's slow and it's boring. And I will say, I don't mind the pace of it. But they do tend to cram the magical elements, the climactic elements, the conversion of Stephen Strange, the acquisition of his power and some knowledge, and the passing on the mantle of the Ancient One, who in this, his mentor is Thomas Lindmer, not the Ancient One, though the Ancient One does appear as a character at the end, a separate character. And they crunched all that in like 20 to 30 minutes. The first hour is really kind of build up. You know, and sometimes they even repeated shots because, you know, these characters are haunted by things that have happened to them. Clea is the main character, who's kind of this embattled woman. Clea Lake is the character's name. The actor, I think, was Anne-Marie Martin, I think. She's very pretty. Very nice casting for Clea. Of course, you know, I'm thinking, if only her hair could have been silver and white. And I'm still holding out for Clea to exist in the MCU, but it's looking less and less likely. But we'll find out on May 5th, I guess. But Clea is a human woman. She's a student studying psychology. And this is where you sneak in some other occult ideas. The ideas of karmic bonds. They call it psychic bonds in this movie. And fate, of course. There's a lot of fate to this. It's not just random. They make the point that Stephen Strange has a destiny, but at the end he can still choose to walk this path or another path. And that decision, that conundrum, that what do you want to call it? The word I can't remember. That problem, that challenge, it is something that is kind of, in a way, the main or dramatic engine of this film. The fact that it's really destiny, because he got the ring from his father. So he has a long talk with Lindmer. Basically, Lindmer goes out into the world from his mansion in the Greenwich Village, the mansion, and he has been presented with a problem. Morgan Le Fay of Arthurian legend, evil witch, has reemerged after 500 years. 500 years after he defeated her in this battle and managed to shut out of our dimension this being called the Nameless One. The Nameless One is not from Arthurian legend. The Nameless One, by name, is a Roy Thomas character from Doctor Strange stories and the Defenders. I'll be talking about it extensively in my Defender stuff. The Nameless One does not look like the fearsome, grotesque entity in the comics, but in his own way is fearsome and grotesque. And that Nameless One that I'm aware of never spoke, but this one, he talks quite a fair bit. He fancies himself quite a erudite Shakespearean performer almost. He has great dialogue. It's not cheesy the way it's delivered. I believe a guy named David Hooks, a British actor, delivered the dialogue. He's uncredited. I was not familiar with him until today, believe it or not, when I researched it. Other uncredited bits I'll get to too and tell you who did what. The Nameless One is he looks like a claymation kind of character that's speaking through stop motion. And there's a lot of hellish reds and yellows and blues, and he's in a hellish dimension. And, they really bring home the other dimensional thing of this, which was a huge part of Ditko's concept and the entire visual design of Doctor Strange, was that trippy kind of thing where Doctor Strange is always going in to another dimension or to battle beings coming from another dimension. The dimensions are opening, the gateways, the portals between, heaven and hell. I mean, between, our realm and the other realm. It's kind of Lovecraftian, and like I said, I read you the introduction to this. The barriers are weakening. This is a tried and true trope throughout all of occult and supernatural dramatic fiction, as well it should be. I mean, because it combines the wonder and occult of other realms, other dimensions with horror, like the apprehension, like, there's really some other dimension out there looking at us and they're malevolent. And they could just come right through this thin barrier at any moment and just ravage us. And a lot of the dialogue in this movie, I think, well portrays that situation. So Linmer ventures out into New York, and he's aged and he's sick, but he's still very powerful. I mean, Wong is doting on him, and he's like, "Master, are you okay?" And he's like, "Yes." Things are becoming more taxing on me, but he's still got a bit of vim and vigor. And quite a bit of power, is not the company or the subject matter. He wants to find Morgan, and he does confront her on the street because she's kind of haunting the area where he lives. It's really her physical body. When I say haunting, I mean she's stalking him. They didn't use that term back then. And he, they have a little exchange of words. And then she possesses this random human woman named Clea Lake, student, to push him over a railing, and he falls on a car. Now, you would think a guy at his age, that would either kill him or permanently handicap him, especially medicine being what it was then. No, he gets up, staggers up. "Man, I'm all right, mate." That's not really what his accent sounds like. I just couldn't think of an elegant one at the last minute. And they show him putting his hand on his side and glowing and healing himself. And I'm like, man, I wish I had that power for my fucking back problems and carpal tunnel. His power is to heal himself. Kind of like Ajax was in the Eternals movie, which was weird. And it didn't work. Ultimately, she couldn't heal herself enough to live, which really sucked. So after that, Clea's kind of lost her mind. She's freaked out. She ends up at the hospital where Doctor Strange works. She doesn't remember her name. She doesn't remember who she is. She's haunted by trying to kill that guy. And basically they explain it because Linmer visits Stephen Strange. And they have a really wonderful little talk, lots of exposition, but it's laid back and friendly, really well acted. And, basically the real kind of questions come out. Are you, from Stephen Strange, like, are you saying, you're doing magic here? I mean, was my father like you? You're saying you're a sorcerer. And he's like, no, my father was not like me, but, my father knew of your destiny and your potential. And Stephen's very rattled by this. And, of course, like I said, doesn't fit into his reality tunnel. And so the amazing Lindmer gives him his card, so you learn his full name, Thomas Lindmer, Landmer. Now, you may or may not have already figured this out from just me talking about it. It took me a while to catch on, but I was a little kid when I saw this. Lindmer, if you reverse his name and drop the D, it's Merlin. So what aged sorcerer had the hardest time with Morgan Le Fay? Merlin. So the strong implication, so strong it's like an anvil on your cranium, is that Thomas Lindmer, 22 Bleecker Court, is indeed Merlin. But I'm glad they never say it, because that would be kind of cheesy. I just think hinting is better. I don't know why they chose that element, but like I said, Philip DeGuere's like, okay, we're going to toss in this Arthurian magical stuff with Morgan and Merlin. So that's a whole piece, that was never in Doctor Strange. I mean, I'm sure at some point Doctor Strange met Morgan Le Fay and or Merlin. It wouldn't surprise me. He's had magical adventure all over the place. I mean, he met Count Cagliostro. So Stephen takes up Lindmer's invitation to come see him at the Sanctum Sanctorum, and he takes his card. His card is embossed with the symbol that's on his ring. It's on the window, the sigil, and he doesn't notice it's embossed at first. It looks like a regular card, and when Lindmer leaves, the embossing. I mean, it doesn't appear, but he notices it for the first time, which means it just kind of appears. And he goes to visit them. He's fascinated because Lindmer claims that he can help Clea. That Clea has suffered a psychic disturbance due to being momentarily possessed by Morgan Le Fay. He's the man to do it. And he wants, Stephen, of course, being her doctor, has a interest in this. And he explains to him in the office that you and Clea have a psychic bond. They shared a dream. Dr. Strange actually looked in on Clea's dream, inside from his own dream. And he talks about the astral planes, which astral plane as everybody knows, is a huge deal in Doctor Strange lore. And, he's like, they're higher and lower planes, and she has, is held in the grip of the higher planes, and there are different ways to access the astral planes, and one is through dreams. And therefore, that's how you know this and how you see this. And this, of course, strongly reminds me later of Twin Peaks, where there are several ways to enter the Black Lodge. You can you can go through dreams, or you can physically go there through portals, mystical portals. So, yeah, the idea of going into a dream and actually touching into another reality is one of my favorite themes. And I've been using it extensively in Flicker Street lately because my dreams have become more and more lucid, and I've been able to incorporate, I hope, impart the vibe that this thin tissue paper, and that, when you're in that dream and there's so much verisimilitude, lucidity, you may be crossing over into something else, and you're bringing that with you. I'm just trying to bring in and channel the ideas, the story that becomes stories and characters. But there is a profoundly magical, mystical element to this. But that's my own deal, and we'll get into that in some other video, maybe. I talked about it several times in the Flicker Street videos. And basically, so Steven's just kind of like, okay, yeah. He's fascinated. He wants to learn a little more about his parents and the ring. And Lindmer's like, keep on that ring. And let me work through you to save Clea. He describes to him hermetic arts, the ability to take fundamental forces of the universe and control them with the will. This is in line with Crowley's magic and theory and practice. Magic is the art. I'm paraphrasing. Magic is the art or the act of exerting one's will upon something and manifesting enabling, creating change, making reality change in accordance with your will, capital W, the true will, capital T, capital W, which goes into the received book, the book of the law, which Crowley said that Iwas, this extra dimensional being, partially manifested to him and told him what to write, kind of possessed him to write it. Kind of like some people say about the Bible, that God possessed Moses to write the first 5 books. And Crowley's book became the Book of the Law, and one of the things he says is, the law is for all. Love is the law. Love under will, which is one of the most famous phrases that Crowley ever wrote. And it's something that I actually have tried to incorporate in my life and not always been successful. But this is exactly what magic is in reality, because there is magic in reality. You may not believe in it. That's cool. Maybe not this kind of magic, but there was some research done into this that goes beyond the Ditko comics. And Ditko himself, I believe, did some research. Stan Lee kind of maybe cheapened things by saying, yeah, we made up all these names, and mystical beings that they call upon for their power, and and it was it's inspired by Chandu and some spooky radio shows. I think that kind of cheapens it. Though Stanley does say a key thing, which is, I believe, is totally true. He says that the names kept coming to him that were invoked, and partial spells. I believe personally Ditko wrote the majority of them, but I do believe Stan Lee probably thought up some, because he says it was like they just were coming to me like from another place, into my. So he's talking about channeling. So I do believe Stan Lee wrote some of the roving rings of Ragador and the mystical moons of Manipur and the crimson bands of Sidorak. I believe he came up with some of those phrases. They came through him. He was a conduit. So if I go this way, I say Doctor Strange is also a channeled work, like I'm finding my own work to be. And maybe it is, because, Steve Englehart and Frank Brunner took it to the next level, where someone is killing the ego, they're transcending death, all this kind of stuff is going on. And of course, Shomogarath was the villain in most of this, and that's got a lot of the eldritch Lovecraftian elements. I'm just going to say the early Doctor Strange, from the beginning through the end of the Jim Starlin run, around the late 20s of his own title, I personally believe that whole and his Defenders appearances. I believe you should read all of that. To me, that's the canon, the Marvel canon of Doctor Strange. There are great things after it, but that's the essential. That's like, to me, it's one story, one journey of one man into total enlightenment, and transcending the flesh to use this power to protect others, protect all humanity, all the universe. And so Lindmer's kind of, about halfway through the movie, Lindmer's still throwing all these ideas at him. And finally he says, here's a way to do it. We're going to send you to these astral planes yourself. And he's like, when am I going to go? He's like, right now. So we get into this mystical segment where Peter Wooten's like flipping around. He's still wearing his regular suit without the tie and the jacket. And it goes into this swirly hypnotic thing. And they do the kind of, this passage through the tunnel kind of effects. There are, multiple lights. And I honestly don't know what this effect is called. But I should know it. I've seen it my whole life. I don't know how it's created. But probably a deceptively simple way. But it looks cool. I mean, it was used on everything kind of sci-fi trippy. It was even used on the, ads for the Monday night midnight movies on ABC. But Strange goes through it. I mean, this, to me, the first time I saw this kind of imagery, it's constantly going forward, all this kind of psychedelic light changing colors, like a drug trip is supposed to be, was was in 2000 A Space Odyssey. My father took me to see it when I was 5 years old, the re-release. And of course, we know there's an extended period where David Bowman goes through this. So it's kind of cool. It's imagery then that's kind of in the public consciousness to an extent. And Morgan senses Strange coming. And so she summons this character, Balzaroth. And that's voiced by Ted Cassidy. Great voice. He was Lurch in the Addams Family. He also did the voice for Ben Grimm the Thing in the Fantastic Four cartoon of the early 80s. So some nice visuals that I think kind of hold up. I mean, they're of their time, but I think they're very cool. It's kind of happening as I'm talking. And Balzaroth tries to stop him now. Lindmer had told him just a one-line spell. If you have problems saying the name of whatever, in the name of Rael, I command you be gone, or whatever. Bringer of light, or scourge of evil, scourge of demons. He does it better than I do. He finds Clea, and she's kind of in this diaphanous gown, and see like numerous angle shots of her cleavage about to tumble out, which I don't think was just like, oops, an accident, or I don't think it was total lasciviousness, but she's a comely young lady. That was a, handsome, comely, lovely, we used to use these other old quaint words. And there's this diaphanous light that's kind of, that kind of you see in Lucio Fulci's movies a lot. And a lot of weird flames and strange little sets where, pardon the pun, where they've done like trees and rocks and mountains. And sometimes you have the scenes where there are these obviously fake, boulders and mountains, that, probably rubber, but they're painted to look that way, and they're kind of floating in the air. And that is a visual trope that Steve Ditko designed for Doctor Strange. He would actually have the character step from one to the other. Occasionally they'd fall off. And you gotta be careful in these dimensions. In Man Thing #1, Howard the Duck's like skipping along, and they're like, be careful, Duck! And Howard the Duck, woo, goes way down into the abyss, in which he ends up on Earth. So Stephen uses the spell on Balzaroth, and he escorts her back. Now, Balzaroth, you can't see him that well, but he looks kind of like a Black Knight kind of character. I don't mean like any character called the Black Knight. I just mean that he looks like a knight in all black armor with crazy horns. Pretty cool design, but again, a little Arthurian rather than Ditko-ish. And the ancient one, the nameless one, banishes Balzaroth. I want to say real quick, I didn't finish my description of the nameless one. I said he was stop motion, so he's all red. He's got two eyes, like he's got an eye here and then kind of diagonal here. His mouth is like way down here, and he has this huge kind of muzzle in his face. He doesn't look anything remotely human. He doesn't look like the nameless one of Defender's lore, but he is evocative visually of Dormammu, Doctor Strange's archfoe, who rules the dark dimension. Now, Dormammu also has a red, flame encircled head, drawn a little bit more literally. But I really believe that the nameless one is the Dormammu surrogate of the story. I believed this when I was a kid, and this is what I'm talking about. Finding the elements and going, oh, this really means this, or maybe it does. In that case, I would say Morgan Le Fay, with her appearance and her conflict with Stephen Strange and also attraction to him, I would say she is a surrogate for Dormammu's sister, Umar, who was another longtime foe of Doctor Strange. She very much resembles Umar, really more than a lot of Morgan Le Fay images. Now, of course, this is 4 years before we were given a somewhat definitive cinematic Morgan Le Fay in the film Excalibur by John Boorman, played by the incredible Ellen Mirren, and boy, she was evil. And Merlin and her looked, their effects and costumes were kind of light years ahead of this. But regardless, these myths are ancient. They're going to be told and retold forever. So Nameless One torments Morgan with, I'm going to turn you into an aged crone where your appearance will reflect your true age. She's like, no, I need my beauty. I'm so vain. But I also want men. I want a man's arm around me. There's a lot of like sexual stuff in here that I didn't really pick up when I was a kid. And you know, she's talking a lot about it. And it's like, but and Nameless One's like, first you must fulfill my lust. And I'm like, is he going to like have sex with her? He's like, my lust is I hunger for the souls of men. And you know, he tells her vanity will be her undoing. But she wants the man, Stephen Strange. He attracted me. The way the characters talk is well done. I mean, I think it's well written, and I think it's well delivered. It is a little campy, but at the same time, in some ways, it's less campy than in a lot of Stan Lee's dialogue for Doctor Strange and stuff like this. And, you know, in some ways, it's on the same level at its best. The Marvel dialogue at its best, the dramatic. You know, when they say stuff like Doctor Strange must die. Now, see, that was a Stan Lee. You know, there was tons of covers or final pages, blurbs for next issue. The main hero must die, and they'd be the title of the story. You know, famous one in Daredevil was Matt Murdock must die. And then, you know, and also Daredevil must die. And I love the end of one of the Netflix episodes where one of the hands says, Daredevil must die. And I was like, this is great. So they say, you know, Doctor Strange must die. Or Stephen Strange must die. So after all this, Clea's better, and he starts romancing her. And it's really sweet. And you know, it's not awkward because you know, if you believe in magic, by this time you've seen it happening and it's real and within this story, then they have a psychic bond. So there is another element of fate and karma that maybe they're destined to be together. Now, I personally don't know if that was an intentional nod to the comics, but it was a major theme of the comics. Doctor Strange, his great love is Clea, and they were destined to be together. And Doctor Strange fights for her through fucking dimension after dimension, universe after universe, and it's extremely dramatic stuff. Some of it's written by Stan Lee and some other writers, and most of it was illustrated by Bill Everett and Maurice Severin, and both of them captured the drama and power of the storyline, that albeit very quirky in their own individual quirky styles. It is Doctor Strange. Quirky's good here. And so I like this connection. And I think it's missing in the Cumberbatch material. I think Cumberbatch's character is kind of like a mean old Scrooge, you know, this humbug guy. His personality didn't profoundly change. He got to the point where he was beaten and worn down, and he said, teach me, and he had the long beard and hair. And I loved that shot and that scene and that line. But, I mean, it summed up how he felt finally in desperation in the origin story in the comic books. But then it's like his old cocky, arrogant self came back, and he wasn't this gentle, philosophical guy that I knew from The Defenders by Steve Gerber, and he wasn't this kind of wise, you know, altruistic, you know, character from the Steve Englehart work. And nor has he been the passionate lover as he was with several writers, with Clea. Clea is one of my favorite characters, so that's why I guess I'm kind of bummed about her not being in the MCU. But anyway, yeah, so Stephen goes back to the mansion, of course, and back to talk to Lynn Murren. You know, they have kind of the big talk at this point where he basically tells him, I don't know what you did to me last night. Ooh. And when that's what he said to Clea, too, probably. They don't have sex, but they do kind of, their date is interrupted. Clea flips out again because she sees Umar, Morgan Le Fay through the mirror. And they start talking about evil, Stephen and Wong and Lindmer. And Wong breaks in and he's like, excuse me, master, let me talk. And Stephen's like, why do you call him master? So you get into that thing like, what? And Wong's like, because of what he has taught me. And Steven's like, Wong, you're an intelligent man. How do you believe this? And Wong's like, it's not a matter of belief, you know? And Stephen Strange says, I cannot bow my head to any man and call him master. He's got some, I'm actually kind of on that passage now, really beautiful sets too. There's a lot of stucco walls inside the Sanctum Sanctorum, tons of books, and, you know, very elaborate looking chairs with very fascinating designs on them, and little statuettes of little weird creatures. And it looks like a set, kind of actually. But it's great. It doesn't look like a regular house. You know, it's like it's got rooms. This could go on forever, like in a dream. You know, I mean, as though this house is like a portal to somewhere else. And in a way, it is, because it's where the energies of Lynn Murray, you know, emanate. And he's got this house under magical protection from Morgan and other forces. Now, after Stephen's, you know, existentialist, self-determinist rant to Lindmer, he goes out into the rain and he can't take his ring off, the magic ring from his father, and he lets a little cat in, a little black cat. I got a little orange cat right here. He's not really much into making any cameos tonight, unfortunately. And of course, the black cat turns out to be a shapeshifted Morgan Le Fay. She blasts the Ancient One. Here we get the first real big demonstration of the powers. And, you know, a lot of light energy. Some of it looks cool. Some of it doesn't. When they try to make the beams have kind of patterns and get all artistic with it, it just looks really kind of cheesy and cartoonish. But when they just use the light itself and direct it in beams, some of it holds up pretty well. Gets its point across. The colors are well chosen, mostly warm colors. And Morgan Le Fay battles Wong, and he shows he's got these powers. But Wong is a cool fucking character in this movie. And he's defeated, and she goes to Lindmer and defeats him and takes him away. So after that, what we're having it boiled down to is there's going to be a challenge in, I'll just call it the dark dimension, even though it's not called that in here. But the place where Morgan dwells, this kind of weird place where she speaks of the nameless one, and all this stuff is crazy, and you know, I just described it a few minutes ago. And she basically kind of crucifies the Ancient One up in this big kind of weird tree that's kind of like a spider's web that has him ensorcelled, and his face looks like a corpse. He's wearing corpse paint. He looks like an elderly black metal musician. And but he's not dead. It's kind of hard to tell at first because his eyes don't really move for a while. And she lures Stephen into her presence. And, you know, Stephen has just been expressing like really strong attraction to Clea. You know, he even said like, you know, like, what's for dinner? What's next? And Stephen's like, how about a warm bath? And she's like, how about a cold beer? But then she laughs. It's like, you need a cold shower, bro, not a warm bath. And so again, there's like the sexual tension thing. But then a few minutes later, he's hooking up with Morgan. Not all the way, but, you know, they make out, and she's like, am I not pleasing to you? And he's like, you're beautiful. And, you know, he's a bit ensorcelled here, and she said she can give him anything: beauty, art, power, wealth, you know, and of course, you know, love, and of course she says everything but sex. But that's kind of what the bottom denominator is, pardon the pun, to all of her promises. And she gives him this new raiment, and it's pretty incredible. It's like this weird kind of series of necklaces with these kind of two clasps, and he gets a cloak that's black with red paneling that comes down. His shirt is kind of a burgundyish purple, and he has a kind of a belt that you tie that's gold, which is what he has in the comic books. And he has gold wristbands that look the same, kind of gold lame, which again evoke his orange gloves from the comic books, which in the MCU he's only worn in Thor Ragnarok, but it was a beautiful touch. And he looks incredible. He's evocative of the Doctor Strange look, very evocative. The colors are slightly in different places. You know, the basic imagery is Doctor Strange. So it's kind of, that's what's inside that silhouette on the cover of Blu-ray. You think it's going to be the traditional Strange costume or the one Cumberbatch is wearing, but it's really this other one. And I loved this costume. Unfortunately, it's not his ultimate costume in this show. We'll get to that. So it kind of all comes down to the wire, really. It's good and evil. What's his choice going to be? And she starts pestering him to take off his ring because I guess she can't fuck him without that ring on. With that ring on, because it's a barrier against her power. So they're making out. She's like, "Take that ring off. Take that ring off." And for he's like, "I can't," and it's true. He lost the ability to take it off a few minutes earlier in the show, right before he encountered her as a black cat. So she oh yeah, one other character that she summons is Asmodeus, Lord of Hell, and he looks very demonic, and there's this silhouette. It's kind of like a gargoyle. He's the one who scoops up Linmer and takes him to the dimension. So here you go, like Asmodeus, that's a real figure in demonology, a Lord of Hell. Has been used in Marvel Comics, but I don't personally recall Asmodeus being a character in Doctor Strange in the comics prior to this period. Later, yes. And he didn't look like that. So, yes, Doctor Strange, 1 minute he's with Clea, and the next minute he's all over Morgan. And he refuses to accept her power. And that's when he, I think, first dawns on him that this is evil. This is bad. I must fight this. And she starts, doing the bolts of bedevilment, which I think is a phrase Stan Lee did make up at him. And they look just like the bolts of bedevilment in the comic. That's a good translation. Albeit, on the cheap, but still bedeviling. And he's knocking them back, and his ring is able to ward them off. Now, I want to say, I didn't like in the MCU how Doctor Strange got this ring where he goes through time or other portals. But I personally believe after watching this again that this is another element they took from this, not from the comic books. And that's okay. Inspiration, that's fine. I do think there's elements of this they ended up in the comic books. I think a lot of the better MCU adaptations have tried to be as faithful as possible to the comic books, but modernized and rationalized within our reality, but also pick and choose, cherry pick elements from other adaptations, other TV movies, film movies, cartoons, other sources, to kind of incorporate it all into a mythology of this character, a definitive. And they did that with Daredevil extremely well. And I think they've overall done that with Doctor Strange well in the MCU, except for Clea. So Strange defies her, and he's not doing too good in this battle. It's a losing battle. How can he really win? I have to do something really quick, and then I'm going to wrap this up when I come back, okay? Back. There was another funny closed caption here that said enchanting music. Essentially, Doctor Strange's potential is beginning to be unlocked during the battle with Umar and him using the ring. So he is able to fire some bolts at her and just blast her away. He doesn't destroy her, but she ends up back in the realm, the dark dimension, I'll call it. And Steven scoops up the Linmer. He is alive, and they go back to the mansion where Kong Long awakens from his attack by Morgan, and basically they're all kind of chilling, and we come to the kind of climactic part of the movie. There's also some funny things along the way, though. I noticed this right here. You see more of the Nameless One and more of his body, and it's really cool. He's like so unhuman looking, and he's scaly, and it's obviously some cool puppetry going on there. But Morgan says, she says, I am, and so here we more of this. Well, never mind. I jumped too far. Basically, she says, I am Kali, I am Lilith, I am Ishtar, and all the powers of all of them. I am woman, hear me roar. And good old Steven, not Steven, good old nameless one. He's like, no, you found me for the last time. And he makes her an old crone, and that's it. Fuck you, Morgan. And so you feel like that's Morgan's fate, but there's got to be a twist ending. We'll get to that. There's about 3 twist endings to this, which by this time it's taken this long for this story to unravel. And when we get to the point where we're getting to this last crucial ritual, I mean, we have 10 minutes left in the film. But essentially, Glenmer says, the sunrise is coming, and it's going to come through the sigil in the window. And you've got to be placed here within the circle. And Stephen's like, well, I'm wearing these raiments from her. And it's like, it's okay. And here's where we have an element directly from the origin. Is Glenmer says, I tricked you, Stephen Strange. I made Morgan believe she had defeated me to lure you there to see if you would do the right thing and free me and make the correct choice, or the choice for the good. And that's exactly in the origin. Mordo keeps Doctor Strange, keeps Stephen from tattletaling on him to the Ancient One that he's found out Mordo is into black magic and serving Dormammu, who we don't see yet at that period. And he puts these mystical things over his mouth and hands. So if he tries to do anything with those, like talk or use his hands to stop him, they'll pop up. But otherwise, they're not visible at all, and they're not functional. So it's a spell. And at the end, the way Stephen gets around it is he says, "Teach me." That's the way he's going to defeat Mordo. And so Ancient One dismisses Mordo's spell. And he's like, I know Mordo is planning against me. I tricked you. Basically, I let you go through this because I wanted to see what choice you would make. And this is exactly translated, the exact conundrum the Strange faces in this. And I really liked the way they brought that element, because that element wasn't in the later film. The Strange is in his somewhat comics accurate costume. And then all this energy pops through the sigil, the sunrise, and he's spoken to by this voice, and that is the Ancient One. So you assume that the Ancient One is above Glenmer in power. So they did get the Ancient One into the story. And apparently he will be important going forward if there were going to be a series. And basically Strange steps on this panel of light. All this energy comes from inside Glenmer, transferred to Doctor Strange. Doctor Strange getting a new costume. He's got a gold cape, a navy outfit. He does have the sigil on his belt, but he also has this symbol that's kind of like Captain Marvel's Captain Marvel. I don't like the costume. It looks more like a DC character of that period than a Marvel character. Frank Bruner did an illustration in conjunction with the movie of Doctor Strange in this costume, which I guess gave it a little legitimacy. But I didn't care for it, but I get what they're doing. And they're basically talking about the guardianship of the light. So they're being a little more vague and less arcane. Basically he's going to protect all of mankind. And he tells Glenmer, he's like, are you going to do this for you or for mankind? He's like, is there really a choice? And Glenmer's like, well, of course there's a choice, but Stephen, I think, is saying, in my mind, being a doctor and a healer, there isn't a choice. So Doctor Strange was always good in this, but he was just, he was like an atheist. He was like a cocky, womanizing atheist, hedonist, rationalist, a Freudian kind of cat, and now he's more of the New Age, philosophical, almost Buddhist at times. Where he's going to use his healing and it's good for this other higher purpose, and there's no injury that makes physical injury that drives him into this and drives the plot. That's almost the major key difference in the storyline between this and the original Ditko origin. And so what they say is that Stephen now has the power, like the raw power, but now you need to be taught how to use it. Linmer's not dead, but he's passed on most of his power, and you have not the wisdom to use your power. Now, Wong is telling him all this. So Wong is giving him sagely advice, and he's like, you are more than a man now, and the Ancient One will teach you. And so it's coming a little more in line with the comics at the very, very, very end. And of course, it was a pilot. So I think this was going to be the spending off period for his training, and each week he gets better at his magic, whatever. But is he still going to be a doctor? Is he going to turn his back on the rationalist world? Well, he pops up at a resonance meeting, and all the comic relief doctors and nurses we suffered through earlier in the movie are at the meeting. And Strange cracks some jokes with them, and again the story kind of like slows down. You're like, this is an obligatory wrap up, which again I think is put here as a springboard for the pilot. So now if there was a series, will he be a doctor by day and a sorcerer by night, or has he quit this life as a resident? I think they kind of make it ambiguous, because at one point he's supposed to meet Clea, and he's on the board for the on-duty Doctor of the Night, and he erases his name from the board. He's walking with this chick, I think her name was Sarah, that he was having an affair with, this nurse, and he got less and less serious with her as it went on. But he's kind of like sidestepping the grouchy docs, and he sees Clea, and he's kind of like basically to me saying, scrub the name off, here comes my girl, fuck you resident, fuck you Dr. Taylor, fuck you Nurse Sarah, and old lady's called Head Nurse, great character name. She's really a crabby ratchet like person. So they start walking around his neighborhood, and she doesn't remember this last thing that happened, or another case of her being attacked by Morgan, or bedeviled by Morgan, bewitched. Well, as they're walking along, flirting rather nicely, I must say, they definitely have a psychic bond. That's a little more than psychic, I think. They pass this bank of televisions, and this news lady is interviewing Morgan Le Fay. There's Jessica Walters. She's back and badder than ever. And she says, yeah, I've developed the Le Fay method. It's a way of realizing your own inner powers, inner potential. So here we go into the self-help thing. This Morgan Le Fay would not be out of place as a guest on Oprah Winfrey Show or on George Ory, Up All Night, Coast to Coast. Why is she looking again? I will say Jessica Walter had a very tiny, brief crush on her when I was a kid, around the time of this, not because of this. But she does look rather nice in this, I've got to say. Rather sexy, and the way they light her, she predominantly wears red, and then of course some black and gold jewelry and paneling, and some of the paneling is really nice, really nicely designed, ornate. She looked like something you'd see on a 70s, fantasy paperback, some witch, dressed this way with this kind of jewelry and this sexy kind of thing. Again, her character it's weird. Phil DeGuere combined a lot of elements. Now, do they all jive? Do they all work together towards a harmonious whole? Kind of. They can't resist the twist ending, first with Morgan. Then, of course, they've got the little ending where Stephen is saying goodbye to her, and there's more sexy flirtation. And he walks down the street, and there's a street magician, and he's trying to pull a bunch of flowers out of a scarf. And Doctor Strange, excuse me, once again, Doctor Strange is kind of chuckling and he walks away, and over his shoulder he does a little motion, which obviously is magic because we saw Linwood do it to people earlier. And out of the scarf, instead of a bouquet of white flowers, comes a white dove. And Strange laughs, but then he looks out and he's got this super heavy melodramatic look, like now the weight of the universe is on my shoulders, baby. And then they freeze that with a drawing version of him, the drawn version of him, as they had in the beginning done one of Jessica Walter as Morgan. I think it's the same artist. I'm going to research this. Incredible art, which is Doctor Strange should always have incredible art. That's just almost should be a universal maxim. And so it ends, and the credits roll, and you don't get the credit for David Hooks as the voice of the Nameless One. You don't get the credit of, I don't think you get the credit of Ted Cassidy as Balzaroth. Maybe you do. You do not get the credit of Michael Ansara as doing the voice of the Ancient One. You do get a credit that says consultant Stan Lee. And man, when I watched this as a kid, I was like, oh my God, finally they show Stan Lee's name and he's the consultant. It's got to be good. And so it was good. There's an audio commentary on this Blu-ray at length by these two cats I've never heard of. I will attempt to name them for you if I can read in a somewhat vision impaired situation. Audio commentary by pop culture historian Russell Dyball and the panel jumper host Cole Hornaday. I was afraid to listen to any of it before this because I was afraid they were going to celebrate this as a victory of great camp and naivety. And they may yet do that. Kind of like John Waters' audio commentary for Mommy Dearest. And I didn't want that. I didn't want to discuss that angle, or I didn't want to adopt or refute any of their findings. So I will probably listen to that tomorrow. My summing up of this is that it's everything I've said it is, and more. No, maybe and less, depending on the viewer. It succeeds in an area that the 2016 Doctor Strange film did not, which was the vibe. And that's probably because we're in 78, 1962, the 60s, 1978, you know, Pink Floyd with Doctor Strange and Living Tribunal on the cover of Saucer Full of Secrets album. What was that, 1969, 1970? We're not many years on from that era of mainstream fascination with magic and the occult and the pop culture influence of Marvel Comics. Doctor Strange really was the perfect character to ride this wave, and I think they kind of hit on all the relevant things. They hit on Ditko, they hit on Satanism, they hit on Arthurian legend, they hit on the self-help thing, they hit on the mystical, magical kind of wave of curiosity about that. They hit on the rationalist, existentialist side. They've got comedy relief. They've got some wild special effects, some of which work, some of which don't. The ones that work, though, are really cool. And the music is by this guy named Paul Chirico. I think he was a friend of Philip DeGuere's, and he said, I want you to go all electronic, and that's the way to go. Sometimes the music is almost overbearing. It's loud in the mix, but I love it. And sometimes it's noise. Sometimes it's like pre-industrial, pre-new wave. And sometimes it's just way experimental cult electronic music along the lines of the great Mort Garson, who did several albums of groundbreaking electronic music, like Electronic Hair Pieces and Fantasia, whatever the one, where he concept album about the secret life of plants. But the one I love the most is the one he did under the name Lucifer. And it was called Black Mass. It was only a 33-minute album. And it's creepy as hell. It's great. And I thought of this when I was watching this, that era, of occult music, occult rock, like Coven, as you know, I love them. Black Widow, Black Sabbath in a different way. This is my wheelhouse. So, I'm all about it. I got it on Blu-ray, man, and I'm gonna hold on to it. Light on extras. Transfer is better than it's ever been. Maybe not as good as some people were hoping for, but you've got to consider how it was shot. I'm not going to say when it was shot because apparently they got as many, if not all, of the original materials and negatives as possible. But they don't, unlike, say, a Blue Underground, Anchor Bay thing where they get all technical about it, they don't go into what they are. Like this was from a 16 millimeter interpositive fused with a 1.5-inch tape television print, the only existing one, and then fused with a 35 millimeter release print. So please excuse that the quality is uneven, and we don't mean to cause you any difficulty in your viewing experience, but this is the very best composite cut we could do. This is, for now, the definitive whatever. So that's probably what happened with Doctor Strange. There's only a couple of parts where they'll have a little black line or something like a hair on the film. That's maybe one time. It looks good. And like I said, it's really from a kid who was a child in the 70s and watched movies on TV in the 70s, including this one, and who's been to New York since then and loves New York. Well, not the way it's run right now, but the state, but New York City as it was, and this is a treat to watch this. It has just the right vibe. Sometimes the music's even kind of funky and proto-disco-y. Well, not proto. This was the height of disco. So, if you're along this vibe, you'll love it. To me, the vibe is very redolent of Doctor Strange in the years prior to this movie. The movie in 2016 is far removed from that vibe, as the Doctor Strange stories in the regular comic books, unfortunately, are as well. In Doctor Strange, in the comic books, he's kind of become this cocky, cynical guy, doesn't really speak in aphorisms or give mystical advice or show strong compassion for characters, kindness, gentleness. That's unfortunate. I don't know. I'm living with it with the movies. I've liked his appearances since his first movie. I've really enjoyed him in Ragnarok and in Far From Home and in the two Avengers films because I thought they struck a pretty good balance in the elements of his personality that were faithful to the comics and that were a little more kind of a riff on them going down its own path to get his own personality. I am a strong detractor of the 2016 Doctor Strange film. I dislike it to the point of borderline hatred because I really felt it betrayed the source material, not by necessarily the letter of the law, the letter of what happened, because yes, he's a rich Aryan guy, he gets in a debilitating accident and he can't perform surgery. He goes to Nepal and he begs the Ancient One to train him, and there's Mordo, and he goes to his powers and he evokes Dormammu. Okay, so yeah, it all sounds like it's right from Ditko, but the mood, the vibe, I didn't feel it. And the effects, they're good, but they weren't very Ditko-like. They weren't even very Starlin-like. I'm seeing the trailers and teasers for Multiverse of Madness, and it does appear that Sam Raimi is taking some of these Inception-like effects from the first Doctor Strange movie and using them and even expanding them into more kind of bizarre, surreal, and Dada-like images. But I think he's also incorporating a lot more of the comic book imagery. And I'm happy. I have high hopes for this film. I enjoy it. But if you really want to see where it all began, if you're into this kind of movie and you can go, yeah, it's slow, it's boring, it's 70s cheesy. If you don't have that mindset going in, prejudicing you, then check this out. I've been dying to own a pristine copy for years. I'm very happy to be able to review this particular Blu-ray. There's not much extras to it, or sparkle, or bells and whistles. But it is a great Blu-ray release, and I want to thank Shout Factory for for getting it to me prior to street date. Hopefully some of you guys will watch this review. If I can get through the algorithms and survive, which means like my video, and maybe some can watch my review and go, this is cool, I'm gonna buy this, and then buy it and then be like, fuck that covert guy, I want to see the Cumberbatch shit. But that, you know, anything can happen. It's all magic, really. So it's all the same energy. So take care, my friends. I will see you soon.